Here with John Shipton. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So yesterday we heard that the US Department of Justice had issued a superseding indictment against Julian. What are your thoughts on this new tactic by the US government?
The narrative supporting them has collapsed completely. So they've thrown the kitchen sink in as well. If it wasn't so important, it'd be comic. So it's such an abuse of process that it, of course, can't go ahead. In this country, the judge would call the prosecution up and say that the prosecution can no longer go ahead, it has no standing. In the United Kingdom, I don't know what they'll do, but I speculate that this is to delay, to ask the judge for a delay until after the presidential election in November. That's seems to be just an addition of allegations in order to use up the resources of the defence. And Ziggy, the accuser, FBI informer, is a very colourful character, to say the least. Has a history of impersonating Julian, stealing $50,000 from WikiLeaks, numerous con man type crimes. With Ziggy and Sabu, I don't see them as witnesses having any credibility whatsoever. So the narrative, our command of the narrative, will return in the next few days as we deal with this further indictment.
How often were you able to see Julian before the COVID-19 lockdown?
Well, whenever I was in London, we went, twice a week, but most of the time I was under writing instructions to go around Europe and gather some support, and after that gather support, political support in the United Kingdom. But COVID came along and stopped that. But most of the time I was in Europe. We went to Oslo and had a meeting in that parliament, and then we went to Stockholm. Actually, in Stockholm now, there's instigation amongst public of Sweden for an independent investigation into the circumstances of the railroading of Julian Assange. Then we went to PACE, which is the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. They issued a support document for Julian saying there should be no extradition. Similarly, in Rome, we went 3 times to Rome. Then we went 3 times to Geneva and met a very, very impressive crew. Amongst those is ex-President Lula of Brazil, very impressive man, gave strong support to Julian. The Canton of Geneva issued a humanitarian visa. The Human Rights Commissioner of the European Council gave fulsome support. The Austrian Foreign Ministry gave us support and declared that Julian ought not to be extradited. The Rapporteur on Torture, the Rapporteur on Privacy, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, all gave the very strongest support to Julian. So we are well armoured. A recognition of self-interest on behalf of the Australian, say, political echelon, if you like, a recognition of that state forming self-interest is in protecting a child of this country who has brought considerable benefits to millions of people around the world. So state forming is a prime responsibility and duty of politicians. They must gather us into a cohesive group, and one of the ways of doing that is to protect its citizens who are under unfair attack around the world, the way Julian is. So simply self-interest. That's all they have to do. It is, and also to elevate themselves above self-interest is to recognize and feel that this is a global difficulty, a severe problem of repression of free speech, of the freedom to discuss amongst ourselves, you and I, the way we are now, although I seem to be doing the most of the discussing, but recognizing, the capacity for us to evaluate facts and go on with things to the best of our knowledge.
The media's interest or lack thereof in presenting the facts in relation to Julian's case has played a major role. Why do you think there is this ongoing disconnect and not fighting against the criminalisation of journalism?
With the media, I just would say that they've come around, that the New York Times had an editorial that Julian ought not to be extradited. The same with The Guardian, and the same with the Daily Telegraph and The Age, and so on. Our support from Channel 9, Channel 9 recognise one big thing, that it's in their self-interest to bring forth the newsworthy items that have the deep interest of the Australian public. Otherwise they wouldn't do the 60 Minutes show, so that our supporters can feel gratification that they're recognised professionally by the people who are paid many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in order to be able to recognise where the public interest lies. The circumstances of a persecution that has lasted 10 years and looks like, if it goes ahead, for the balance of Julian's life. That's the circumstance that must be recognised by our political elites.
You were in the courtroom the first week of the hearing. Do you think the final 3 weeks will be held under different circumstances, like a larger court or no glass cage, or Julian being even allowed to sit with his lawyers?
All I ask of the magistrate is to recognise that this case is a fraud upon the court, a abuse case, abuse of process case, and a fair and humane application of their own laws. That's all, nothing more. Don't ask for them to see the light or to become supporters of WikiLeaks or Julian. Just the fair application of their own laws, and to see that it's in their self-interests. The interesting thing here is that Magna Carta brought about the circumstances where a shield was placed between the sovereign, or the state, and the people. And the shield faced two ways, to the people and to the sovereign. So the sovereign, or the state, must obey the laws in its relationship with the people. In Julian's case, that great civilizational gift that the English people brought to the world has been progressively abandoned. This is a personal tragedy for Julian, his family, and a civilizational tragedy for the United Kingdom.
Today is International Day of Support for Victims of Torture. Both Julian and Chelsea Manning are and were tortured throughout their imprisonment. Chelsea has been free now for 3.5 months, released after an attempt at taking her own life. Do you know how she's doing?
I don't, but Chelsea Manning has arisen before my eyes as a saint, having all the attributes of a warrior saint. The French girl comes to mind, St. Joan d'Arc. And so that she has overcome, she has turned her torturers' instruments against them by the profound depth of her courage. And Julian is in the same situation where the acts against him in a heinous accumulation over 10 years of psychological tortures and physical deprivations have, and he continues, and he's still with us, have caused him, like Chelsea, to rise before our eyes into the position of the tortured one, the one who overcame all obstacles on behalf of us.